G'day and welcome back for another Space Engineers tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at how to get to space, and that's really quite simple if you want to get up there and not be able to do anything. All you need to do is pop a full hydrogen bottle in your inventory and fly straight up, and you'll get to space. You won't be able to do much up there, but you'll be able to get to space. So what we're going to be looking at is more how we can get to space and do something useful while we're up there. And if not useful, at least interesting. In Space Engineers, there are three different types of thrusters. We've got the atmospheric thrusters we've used on our mining ship. These don't work beyond a certain altitude because they need a planet's atmosphere in which to work. We also have ion thrusters. These require thruster components. Thruster components need platinum, and we don't have platinum on Earth-like. It can only be found in asteroids or on moons, so we're going to have to get to space before we can even consider building those. And then finally, we come to hydrogen thrusters, and this is what we're going to use today. Hydrogen thrusters require hydrogen fuel to function, which means these thrusters need to be connected to your conveyor network, and we're going to need to have a hydrogen tank to run these effectively. You can get by with an O2H2 generator directly providing fuel to these, but it is almost always less efficient than using a tank. If we need lots of hydrogen, we probably want a bigger hydrogen tank than the little one we have over here. To begin with, I'm going to cut out this and build a couple of conveyors off to the side. Lift this up a bit so that I can slap the tank straight on there. Let's search for tank. Use this one with a little plus because we're going to be using a few different types of tank. Under this tank block, you'll find a bunch of different things, especially if you also have the DLC variants, but the tank we're looking for is just simply called hydrogen tank. This has ports on all sides right in the middle. So as long as you place it so that these are connected to your conveyor network, it'll work just fine. And hydrogen tank. I'm now going to add these parts to my build planner. Right click, right click, right click, right click, and right click. And it's important to note while I'm building this, that that hydrogen tank, when it's full, is an explosive. If it takes enough damage, it will explode and go off, kind of a bit like a warhead. It's going to do a lot of damage. So we want to make sure that it doesn't take a lot of direct damage. The bigger the tank, the more full it is with hydrogen, the bigger the explosion. Building this platform is a purely aesthetic choice. It doesn't actually provide any functional benefit to us, but I quite like having things looking like they have been properly supported, even though they don't need to be. This tank's going to supply the fuel to our ship, so what I'm going to do next is build a couple of these conveyor blocks, and then build a junction. Upon this junction, I'm going to build a connector, but I'm going to build an inset connector. The reason I'm using the inset connector is that if we have a look at it, we have our connection port, and then on the back, we have a conveyor port, but we also have one on the bottom. If we compare that to the regular connector, it just has the connection port and then the port on the back. So if I use this inset connector, I can place it on top, like this, and that's going to provide a connection while it sits on this conveyor junction block, which is all just a style thing, but a useful difference to be aware of between the two of them. Right click on all those blocks, get them into production, get this welded up. Just to make sure we have got this piping all correctly done. See, the lights are all green, but we can access this connector via here, look for our cargo, and see if we can move things in and out. And we can. So that's excellent. So now we can lay out a bit of a landing pad. When we were building this mining ship, we made sure that all the thruster exhausts were clear of blocks. But when we land, these thrusters actually get pretty close to the ground. With the atmospheric thrusters, they don't tend to shoot out quite so far, but they have still managed to damage this floor. This 96% here versus this 100% is almost entirely due to this flat atmospheric thruster burning my landing pad. Same on this side. We can prevent that burning by using different blocks, because there are some blocks that are immune to that thruster damage. And we're going to jump across to creative mode so I can demonstrate which ones those are. If we turn on this atmospheric thruster, its thrust is now at maximum. This plume you can see here, that's pretty much the range at which you will see damage to blocks. And also to yourself. If you fly into this, it hurts. Same with our hydrogen thruster. That plume is roughly where you will see the damage. And ow, that one hurts more. But it's not just the player that gets hurt, it's also the grid. And we would like our landing pads to be a bit better protected. So now let's look at what happens with blocks. Here what I've got set up is a hydrogen thruster pushing against the light armor block. hydrogen thruster pushing up against a heavy armor block, and a hydrogen thruster pushing up against a blast door block, as well as a large grid thruster pushing up against the same blast door block. So I'm going to turn each of these on, and we'll see what starts happening to the blocks that they are pushing up against. Beginning with our light armor block, if I bring up my welder, you can see that it's already down to 80% health. It's losing steel plate fairly rapidly, and will likely explode kind of soon. Our heavy armor block, it's taking damage a bit more slowly, and it's got more health to begin with because it's got more steel plate in it and more metal grid. Then we have our blast door block, which is perfectly intact. These large grid blast door blocks are completely immune to small grid thruster damage. Large grid thruster damage, however, not immune. They will take damage. So if we've got small grid ships and we want to be able to land them somewhere and have their thrusters not damage our landing pad, we can use blast doors. Heavy armor, not as ideal. You're going to have to do some maintenance. And light armor, well, I almost timed that properly for this. So what we're going to do with our landing pad is we're going to build the spots where the thrusters are going to be out of blast door blocks. This is more important with the ship we're building today than with our mining ship, because when we come back from space filled up with ore, these thrusters are going to be working really hard and are likely to cause damage to the ground much more quickly than our atmospheric thrusters did. As you could see, when they hurt my player, the hydrogen thrusters hurt more. For our landing pad, we're going to build part of it out of those blast door blocks. Find them in our block menu by searching here. Right click to add to my hotbar. Let's take a bit of a closer look at this block. One of the big differences between blast door blocks and regular armor blocks is that blast door blocks do not occupy the full cube space. Even the full-size blast door blocks, which we're looking at here, have a space around them. You can see that gap between the block and its green outline. If we change to the different types, there are some extra bits cut out, but none will fill the space more than this standard blast door block. What I'm going to do, so that I don't have a gap in my landing pad, is I'm going to place them horizontally like this, so that the gap is above and below. This is okay to walk across. You can walk across this drop. Also worth noting, you can't attach on those sides that don't have any material, so it is easier to build this rotated like that. Then down the center here, you can either place blast door blocks, or if you want to save a bit on steel plate, we can just place regular light armor, because our thrusters are not going to be interacting with that part unless we're landing a bit awkwardly. And we do save on a fair bit of steel plate. These full blast door blocks take 140 steel plate per block versus the 25 from a regular light armor block. So I'm going to get this welded up, and I'm also going to build this bridge connection from over here to my new platform, as long as I haven't already run out of steel plate, so that I can walk between the two parts of my base. And now, with our landing pad built and a little bit decorated, I've just painted a few bits and pieces here and there, we can now get to building our ship. What I would like this ship to be able to do is to go to space, mine some ore, and come all the way back. Or be equipped well enough that I could even take materials to space to build another base up there so I can bring back ingots, or even just stay up there if I wanted to. So that means we need a fair amount of cargo space and a fair amount of fuel. To start building our ship, I would love to build it off this connector. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop in here, go to the control panel, find this connector, and we're going to call it Inset Connector Spaceship. Scroll all the way down to the bottom and you'll find this strength control. This strength control is for the magnetic strength that's going to pull two connectors together before they lock. If we set this very high, we can do something fun with the connector we're going to build in front of this. So we go back to our hotbar, find our connector, move over near the base's connector, press 4 again to switch back, then we can rotate this around until it's aligned roughly with the connector in front of it, and just drop it on the ground. If you find that it keeps switching between grid sizes, try not to move your character around, and it shouldn't switch types as easily. We can then weld this up, and when we weld this up, it's going to pull it up towards it, as long as we've built this connector close enough to the wall. We can then go into our connector that we've just built, go to our control panel, and we can increase its magnetic strength too. And it will snap up like that. Just lifts it off the ground and puts it in a great position for us to build. Although, not exactly straight on. And you might find that yours is even worse than mine. It may be more crooked than this. And we can fix that crookedness by just placing one block on here. If I place a block here, it will spin round and then stop. And that gives us a perfectly square connector lifted off the base. Go into our control panel, select lock, and now, really, really important, turn off this strength. You do not want to be using a ship and trying to land with that strong a magnetic force pulling you into it. You will snap your ship into that position so rapidly, you will almost certainly break something. Probably even the connector. So let's find our other connector. We know it's this spaceship one, and we'll turn down its strength too. With one of the connectors set to disabled, you should be safe, but just to make sure you don't end up parking here with a different ship that's got a different connector, let's set our strength to disabled on both of them. Because this is locked, we don't need that strength or that supporting block anymore, and now we can build off the base, allowing things like our hydrogen tank to fill, allowing things like our batteries to get charged. If you're finding that this method of building is quite difficult, don't worry. What you can do instead is just build from a landing gear, pop it down, and pop a couple of blocks on top, then pop your connector on top of that. And you'll be able to build exactly what we're going to build today. It just means that you won't be able to have those batteries getting charged during the building process. I just wanted to show off this little technique because I find it quite useful and a nice way to be able to start off the base, even though it is a bit more fiddly to get going. Now, we've got our connector. Next thing we're going to build is a hydrogen tank. The one we want to use is this hydrogen tank, the one that looks large like this. It has 4 little ports around the outside and 2 big ports, one on each end. This is identical to the lab hydrogen tank, which is DLC variant. If you want to use that one, go for it. It is functionally identical, it just looks a bit different. We're going to stick with the base game versions because I feel like that's the right thing to do for a tutorial. What we want to do is make sure that the large port on the other side is aligned properly to that connector. The way that I find it easiest to do that is to stand in this position and line it up. We click there, we can see that this shape around the end of the block is lined up perfectly on that connector, so we can get this welded up. One really nice thing about having a connector set up like this that's already piped to our base is that I can use Build Planner directly on my connectors here. So if I right click on this hydrogen tank, press shift middle mouse to set those into production, middle mouse to grab the bits that are already there, we can now weld this up. And that is a much quicker way of getting access to those resources. The next thing we're going to build is going to be a cargo container. And we're going to be wanting to bring a lot back from space because space is a long way away. We don't want to have to keep going there and back and going there and back. With this small grid large cargo container, we need to pay very close attention to the arrangement of these ports. You have 1, 2, 3 large ports, and then you have 1, 2, 3 small ports. And we need to make sure that we have a large port going onto the large port of the tank, and that we have a large port going forward and up. So to make sure we have that correct, what we want is those bars on this container pointing upwards when this is snapping, because they point up to the other ports. They go in a line. And we make sure by going 1 too far, that's a small port, so let's go rotate 1 back, and then click this down. We can't tell from this build state that we have done this correctly. So let's weld it up a little bit. When it gets to this level of build state, you can tell what ports are here. This is a small port, this is a large. So we've got a large here, we've got a large here, and presumably, because we can see the small going down, the small going left, and the small going right, that the one on the tank is going the correct direction. We can confirm that once it's fully welded up by going to our, let's go to our hydrogen tank, TTT. Transfer my bottle, and because I can transfer it through here, we know we've got large ports all the way through, correctly lined up. Next up, we're going to start adding our thrusters. We want a lot of thrust. So let's grab this hydrogen thruster block here, put it on our hotbar, and what we're going to start with here are 4 of these large hydrogen thrusters. These have 4 little ports around the outside and 1 3x3 port on its top side, or back side, depending on which way you're orienting. It's got a big port on one side. The important thing to know about hydrogen thrusters is it doesn't matter what size port you connect with. So, we can get just as much fuel to this thruster by placing it on the side like this, using the small port going directly onto that tank. So we're going to place 1 there, then we're going to place 1 similarly on the cargo container, right there. Come around this side and do the same. And now, with those thrusters arranged that way, you can see why the blast door blocks I set up are done this way, because those thrusters, they're sitting right on those blast door blocks. In between these thrusters, we're going to place a battery. We do need to have a battery on this grid, even though the thrusters don't require much power, because the grid itself needs power for the conveyors to work. It needs power to provide power to your cockpit, and it needs power for drills, for ore detectors, for antennas, for the survival kit that we're going to place on here later. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build 2 batteries on this ship. It's a lot of power for a hydrogen-based ship. The reason I want 2 of these batteries is not because we need that much power output at any one time. It's because I think it's beneficial to have this much power storage so that this ship can fly around for a long time before we have to worry about its power reserves. So 1 battery on each side, with the top of the battery just above the height of the thruster. We'll weld this up, and then those batteries can start getting charged from our base because we've got an excess of power thanks to all those wind turbines. While you were welding up these thrusters, you might have noticed that they turn on. You can see here, there's a bit of thrust reflected on there, and it is actually that plume touching this blast door block. If we had just regular armor there, this would probably have already blasted its way through in the time it took me to build these 4 thrusters. And that's another reason for the blast door blocks, but also an opportunity to point out that while these are on, they are consuming a teeny tiny, eensy weensy little bit of fuel. It is so little, it really doesn't matter, but it's enough to cause damage to the stuff around them. So we could either turn these off now, or in my case, I'm just going to leave them on until we have the rest of our ship built, and then we build a docking event controller which will turn them off every time we dock. The amount of fuel they use in the interim is so small that I'm not going to worry about it. We can check on these batteries. If we go and search for battery, and you'll see that these are the ones in white, and they say they are currently fully recharged in 23 minutes, so that's perfect. They're gaining enough charge that I'm just going to leave them on automatic as they are for now. We've got a large hydrogen tank, but that's a fixed reserve of fuel. If we're flying to space, it would be very nice to be able to refuel while we're up there, just in case we need to. And we probably don't need to refuel particularly quickly, but it would be nice to have the capacity to do it at all. In order to allow us to do that, we're going to add an O2H2 generator to the front here. O2H2 generators in small grid have this large port on one side and these 2 small ports on the other side. What we're going to do is we're going to arrange this O2H2 generator so that those 2 small ports are vertical. That's going to allow us to align up some other bits later, and that's why we want to do it that way. So we'll place that on there, weld it up, and now we have the means to refuel while we're in space. We'd also like to be able to collect materials while we're in space, so let's put a couple of drills on here. I'm going to put a small conveyor, come around to my connector here, grab the parts from the side of it, with middle mouse, small conveyor there, and then we're going to add a pair of drills. So we'll search for drill. There are 2 versions of the drill. This version and the DLC version. We're going to use the regular version here. You can use either. And I want to rotate this around until I'm looking at that conveyor and it's showing green and snapping to it. So we've got 1 drill there. Same on this side, making sure it's snapping to that conveyor. 1 drill there. Because these drills have 3 ports on them, 1 on each side and 1 on the back, the side ones are connecting up to this conveyor here, and then that is directly connecting up to the O2H2 generator, which then pipes through to the rest of the ship. So anything our drills collect will be able to get straight into that container. The next thing I want to add to this is something to keep myself alive. It'd be nice to be able to breathe up there and not have to remember to bring oxygen bottles in my suit every time we go to space. So what I'm going to add is from this tank block, you can find the small oxygen tank. If you scroll through, you'll find a regular oxygen tank. It's too big. We don't need that much. These little ones. And we're going to build 2 of these. 1 on each side, attaching to the back of these drills. Because those conveyor ports and connections go all the way through, this is a perfectly valid place for this to go. So place 1 there, come around this side, and place 1 there. The 2 of them, honestly, it's just for symmetry. That's why I've got 2 of them. It's not for any particular functional reason. I think we would have plenty of oxygen just from 1 for most durations of play before you'd have to get back to the planet, but having 2 looks nice and does give us that little bit of extra. Now, because we have a vent over here on our base set to depressurize, it just filled up those tanks because it's providing oxygen to this conveyor system. That's going through this conveyor system all the way into the ship, and now both of those tanks are filled with oxygen. And that will happen every time it connects to the base, which is really quite nice. The next thing I want to add to this is going to be a cockpit. Let's press Control 3, go to our 3rd hotbar, search for cockpit, grab this one with the plus symbol, I'm going to be using this standard cockpit because it has a large port on the bottom. That means that I can hook it up straight on top of this cargo container, allowing the cockpit to have access to the oxygen in these tanks. So we'll spin that around, pop it on there. Then, because this cockpit has 2 ports on the back, it becomes the perfect location for us to place a survival kit. The reason I want to put a survival kit on this vehicle is that we are going up to space. If we end up jumping out of our cockpit to investigate something and go splat into an asteroid or something else like that, it would be really nice to respawn at this vehicle rather than at this base more than 40 kilometers away from where we need to be. So bringing a respawn point with us makes a lot of sense to me. So let's search for kit, grab our survival kit, and the survival kit in small grid has 2 connection points on it. It has this large port on one end and this pair of small ports on the other. Those pair of small ports line up perfect to this cockpit, so we can make sure that we place this on here so that the small ports are going to that cockpit. Pop it on there, and then on the back of this we're going to place a large hydrogen thruster. That's going to be our forward thrust. It's important to note for the survival kit that you will need to have the ability to make medical components in order to build the survival kit, so you will need to have found silver if you want to make this, at least without taking the medical components out of your survival kit that you started with. So we have forward thrust, we have lifting thrust, and we're going to need to get thrust in all the other directions as well as adding some gyroscopes. We're going to start with the gyroscopes. Again, searching in my block menu for gyro. I'm going to place 2 of them on the front here. I'm using 2 because when this vehicle is fully loaded up, it's going to be pretty heavy. So I think I'm probably going to want to have more than 1 gyroscope for this in that instance so that I can actually turn it at a reasonable rate. With the gyroscopes on, the last thing we're going to need for movement is thrust in all of the other directions. Since we're going to space, we can't rely on gravity to take us down. We're going to need to have thrust pushing us down, as well as forwards, backwards, up, left, and right. So 6 directions of thrust for this vehicle. What I want to do to be able to place my thrusters in a more interesting and, I think, cleaner orientation is I'm going to be placing these conveyor converters on top of my large thrusters. I'm going to rotate them so that the 3 little ports go lengthways down the ship, and you can see there's a large port on there that's going to align to my large thruster. So 1 on each one. Don't worry too much about the colors here. This is going to get painted shortly. With those on, we've now got a nice spot for a few reverse thrusters. I'm going to switch to the small ones. I'm going to place 2 here. Plenty of clearance in front of them. That means they won't cook any of the blocks in front of them. Then along the side here, so that we don't make the ship any wider than it already is, I'm going to place 3 thrusters like this. If you happen to have these DLC industrial hydrogen thrusters, you may notice that you can't place these initially. That's because unlike the base game thrusters, they don't have an attachment point on their side. So what you'll need to do is first place down these small conveyor blocks like so, then you'll be able to build those thrusters onto it. I'm going to add a 4th small conveyor on each side like this, get these welded up, because that's going to make it easier than welding these up after I place my next thrusters. With those welded up, we can now place our down thrusters, and I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4. You may have noticed that there is an unequal number of thrusters in each direction. Some of you may prefer to try and match this to make it a bit easier to fly. I've never found it to be too big of a problem, and there are some other ways that we can manage those differences later on, such as turning some of these off. And now with thrust in all directions and gyroscopes, this should be safe to fly, right? Well, don't go rushing to disconnect this just yet, because unless you already had a lot of ice on your base, this tank will be empty. We hop in the cockpit and search for tank. We can find our hydrogen tank. It's the white one because I'm in the cockpit, and you can see that it is empty. If I want to fill this from the hydrogen tank on the base, what I can do is I can select stockpile and turn this on. That will start pulling from all connected hydrogen tanks that are not also set to stockpile. So if I turn this off and I set the base's hydrogen tank to stockpile, it's going to pull back out. But if I turn this one to stockpile on as well, both of them just sit there in a stalemate. So we need to make sure that whichever tanks we want full or want pulling the fuel to them are set to stockpile, and whichever ones are the delivery tanks are not. So let's turn off stockpile on the base tank, and you can see that we are now getting the tank on this filled up. If you happen to disconnect your ship before you've filled up that tank, then this O2H2 generator will become quite handy because you can simply put some ice in the ship, get just enough fuel to then take off and reconnect to the base, and use this stockpile feature to fill up the tank. When we're looking at the sizes of these tanks, you can see this is the tank on the ship. This is a small grid, large hydrogen tank, and it holds 500,000 litres. The large grid, large hydrogen tank holds 15 million, so 30 times as much. The large grid, small hydrogen tank holds 1 million, or twice as much.
So we've got enough fuel on the base right now to fill this tank 1.5 times.
So I probably should go and collect some more ice so that I can build up a bigger stockpile here. And now that we've got fuel, we can disconnect our ship. So I'm going to press G, and I'm going to find connector. And I'm going to find the connector that is on this ship, except I can't because I haven't named them. So what I'll do is I'll go to the control panel, search connector, find the one that's listed in white, and call this connector spaceship. Because I don't have a more creative name for this ship at the moment. And I'll rename this inset connector to base connector, so that I know that it's on the base and this one's on the ship. Then I can go back to my G menu, search for connector, find my connector, spaceship, and put it on switch lock. It's going to allow me to unlock from the base. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to unlock and everything's going to turn off. It's all just going to sit here. And that's because of a problem that is kind of really common. The hydrogen tank, it's still on stockpile. So we need to turn stockpile off in order to have it deliver fuel to all of these thrusters. And now I can fly. If I wanted to, I can even go and use this to go and mine some of my ice. So to set this up for mining, let's grab our tool blocks, put that on the first one. But we might also want to set up our drills as a group. So we'll go to our control panel, search for drills, grab both of them, and add them to a group, spaceship drills. Then I can also, on my hotbar, add this group from the group tabs on the left, toggle block on and off. If you're building a ship like this and you want to make sure that it can actually hold all of the ores that you want to bring back from space, now would be a good time to fill it up. So if I fill this up with ice, since every ore has the same density, I could either fill it with ice or with stone, whatever I like, and we are full. So you can see when I'm hovering, the plumes from my thrusters are actually quite long because it's having to work quite hard against the gravity. But I've still got a bit of extra lift, so my plumes get longer when I try and push myself up. Those thruster plumes are why we protected our landing spot, because when we come back fully loaded, there's a good chance we're going to cook some things. Up there, we're hoping to find some ore, so let's search for ore and put an ore detector on the front. I'm going to pop it here. Ore detectors do not have an orientation that matters. They can face any which way. They scan in a sphere. I'm just placing it this way because I think it looks better. And then we need an antenna. The reason I would like to have an antenna for when I'm in space is because it's it's reasonably likely, or highly in my case, that I will get lost if I don't have some way to identify where my ship is when I'm out there. If I fly away from this and I don't have an antenna, there is no way I'm finding my way back home. So I'll build the antenna and make sure that its broadcast range is long enough that we're unlikely to fly away from it so far that we'll lose track of it. And 5,000 meters will be adequate, I think. At this point, our ship is perfectly capable of getting to space and coming back without any problems. Yes, it's all manually controlled and there's some automations that I'm going to teach you soon, but there's also something really important we need to talk about, which is that Space Engineers has a speed limit, and it is a hard speed limit, and it is going to cost us a lot of fuel if we push against that speed limit. On your screen right now, you can see two engineers, both of them starting with a full suit of hydrogen and with a bottle with a small amount of hydrogen in it. What we're going to do is fly both of them up to space, but on the left, we have an engineer who is going to push against the speed limit as hard as they can the whole way and see when their fuel runs out. And on the right, we have an engineer who's going to sit just below the speed limit so that all of the thrust that they use is pushing the engineer and none of it is pushing against that speed limit. And we'll see how that goes. But I think you probably know the answer already. The one on the left, they're going to run out soon. And the reason is they are wasting fuel pushing against that speed limit. So we want to avoid doing that with our ship as well. We want to push just under that speed limit so we're moving as fast as we can, but not wasting any energy pushing against that immovable speed limit. And there are a few ways we can do that. One, we can manually do it as I'm doing it with this engineer right now, where I'm tapping the spacebar with my dampeners off so that each time I release, I'm just coasting going up. But on a ship, you have a few other options. And now back to our ship, and before we attempt to take this to space, let's automate one little thing, which is the docking, so that we make sure we don't undock when our tank is on stockpile, but also that our tank goes onto stockpile whenever it connects to the base. We'll grab an event controller, event, and I'm going to pop this facing like this on here. And the reason for that will become apparent later when we do some more automation and I want to add more of these event controllers, and that line on the top ends up looking a bit interesting. If you prefer though, you can have it facing up this way so that you can see all the controls and the details. I just thought that stripe ends up looking kind of interesting at the end. So with an event controller on board, let's disconnect from the base, because it's much easier to set these up when you aren't connected to all of the other blocks. We'll find our event controller, and we'll call this spaceship event controller docking. So this event is going to be on connector connected. We'll grab our connector spaceship, add it to the blocks list here, and then select our actions. And it's going to do a few things. What we want it to do when it docks is take our hydrogen tank and set it to stockpile on when docked and stockpile off when undocked. We can do the same with our oxygen tanks just to ensure that they get filled. Not really relevant on this particular base, but may be relevant if we end up building a space base and we want to make sure that this ship is the priority for having oxygen. We're going to want to set our batteries to recharge just like we set our tank to stockpile. So this will be spaceship batteries. We're also going to want to turn off all of our thrusters. So let's search thruster, grab every single one, and spaceship thrusters. Now we can go back to our event controller, select our actions, move to the next hotbar with control 4, find our group for our batteries, and on docking we want recharge on, and on undocked we want recharge off. Then we go to hotbar 5, our thrusters, toggle block off when docked, toggle block on when undocked. And if you're like me and you don't like having lots and lots of broadcasts on your HUD all the time, we can similarly turn our antenna off when connected, on when disconnect, and lastly, the ore detector toggle off, toggle on. And now, when I reverse up to the connector, you'll see that this all nice and neatly switches all the states. Thrusters are off, antennas off, ore detectors off, and all the other things are filling up from the base as best they can. Excellent. Now, let's talk about the many different ways we can get this ship to space. As we saw before with the engineer in their suit, we want to turn dampeners off rather than just pushing up against that speed limit and going full thrust the whole way, because that's wasteful. So we can start going up, press Z to turn our dampeners off, and then cruise and just keep tapping spacebar as we need to keep our speed somewhere around 95 meters a second. Doesn't need to be too accurate, and you can do this all the way to get to space. But honestly, it's a bit of extra effort, and I'd rather not have to pay this much attention to what I'm doing. So let's make an easier way. We'll turn our dampeners back on, come to a stop, and what we're going to do is go to our second hotbar with control 2, open up our control panel. We're going to find up thrusters. Grab all of these, make them in a group, click save. Now we can go to our hotbar controls with G, find our groups, and we want our spaceship up thrusters. I like to put this on a second hotbar because it's very easy later to forget which thrusters are where, and at least if I put them on separate hotbars, I'm less likely to click the wrong thing. With our up thrusters group, I'm going to right click on it, and for this we're going to set 4 different controls. The first one is set override percentage to 0. And I'm going to rename this to stop. Then we're going to have decrease thrust override. Then we're going to have increase thrust override. And the last control is set override percentage to 100. I'm just going to call this go. And now we can enable thruster overrides. And if I start pressing increase, you'll see that I actually start falling. And that's because as soon as I enable that small amount of override, it undoes what my dampeners are trying to do. They're trying to resist gravity, but as soon as I enable a 5% override, it's not enough, so I start dropping. This isn't too big of a problem while I'm hovering here, because I can keep spamming this button until we finally get to start accelerating, and now we're going up. But if I'm on the ground, it'd be really nice to just hit the go button and put it at maximum, and then start winding it back as we're hitting it at the speed limit. So we can keep bringing this down, 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 until we start seeing our speedometer go down, then tap it up again. And this way, we can just tap from time to time, sitting around that 95 meters per second mark, or a little bit higher if you'd prefer. And this way, we can get to space really efficiently. Our altitude has now gotten so high that at our lowest possible override, our speed is still increasing. So we're going to be pushing up against the speed limit. What this means is I can either leave it at this point or I can turn off the override, at which point my down thrusters start pushing, which isn't great. So I've got a couple of options of how to deal with this. I can either turn off my dampeners just as I would have while pressing space, or if I want a little bit more control and so that I don't have any sideways drift because my sideways thrusters will keep working, what I can do is go into my control panel, search for down, and make a group of my down thrusters. I could then go and add them to my hotbar and turn them off. If we turn them off, then when I reduce my thrust override, it's just gravity that's slowing me down, not my thrusters. I'm just going to leave my down thrust off until I reach space. It is very important to remember that when you're using thrust overrides, your regular controls for those thrusters no longer function. So if I've got my thrust override on, I can't hit space like I'm hitting it right now, and it won't do anything. If I turn them off, however, I get that control back, and you can see I can get that big boost back by hitting spacebar. So if you feel that you've lost control of your ship, do check to make sure that you've turned your thrust override off, and that's why I set up that control on number 1 to turn the override off. Our altitude just about to tick over 42 kilometers. Our planetary gravity has dropped to 0.05. The next drop will be when we're in space, and it will be down to 0 Gs, which should happen now. That was actually good timing. So we can see the little sparkles going past us that indicate we're now in space. We can see our planetary gravity is saying 0.00 Gs. So we can turn off our overrides, we can turn back on our down thrust, and we can now explore in space. You can see some of these asteroids nearby. We could go and investigate them and see what resources they have. One thing to do when you are searching asteroids is try not to fly directly at them. That's a very bad idea. Shoot just off to the side, because there's a very high chance that if you do cruise straight toward them, you'll get distracted and you'll hit them. Now I'm just going to turn my dampeners off so I can cruise on my way to that asteroid without using up any more fuel. And then when I reach there, I turn my dampeners back on to come to a stop. Now that you're in space, what you may want to do is turn off some of your lifting thrusters, because your up thrust is for big thrusters. Your down thrust is just for smalls. And if I tap to go up, I actually get to 10 meters a second on a little tap. But if I tap to go down, I barely get over 1 meter per second. So to make that control a bit more balanced, so you can search for up thrust and you can find, say, 3 of them and go space, ship, thrusters, up, partial. Save. We can make that a group where we can then control that separately. Toggle on off. If we turn that off, we now only have 1 lift thruster, which means we get up to just over 1 meter per second going up and going down about the same from a single tap. So that's going to make a much more balanced control and make this easier to control when you're near that asteroid. So let's again dampeners off and head towards this asteroid. While it's possible to run into pirates on a planet, it's a bit more likely to run into aggressively hostile pirates up in space. So if you see a red marker on your HUD, make sure you keep your distance from it until you're prepared to deal with some combat, which is not with this thing. And now that we've reached the asteroid, we can now cruise around its surface, trying to spot any ores. If we do manage to find anything, strongly recommend creating a GPS. And if you don't find anything, I also strongly recommend you create a GPS. The reason is, every asteroid you look at, you should mark so that you know whether you need to come back or not. But look over here. I found gold on my ore detector, which just got out of range as I spoke about it. And I've also found, there we go, it's back. And I've also found some ice. So we've got ice and gold on this asteroid. So what I would do is go /GPS. Would probably want something to indicate that this is an ore marking, but it's for asteroids. And then what's on here. So that's ice and gold. That way, when you have a list like this, you can more easily turn on and off the GPS markers you want, rather than my one, which is a bit of a jumbled mess where I've labeled some things correctly and some things not, so I don't know what they are. You may notice that there is no moon in sight. I'm unfortunately on the wrong side of this planet to go and search out for the moon and go and fly there, but you could fly there in this ship. If you did that, you might die though, because I didn't pack any food, which means I'm going to have to go home soon, which is good because I want to show you how to automate this so that that whole launch sequence is a single button press. Things we need to add. First one, lights. Let's search for light, and we'll add some spotlights. One on each side. Much like our mining ship, let's rotate these so that the bars are vertical. That way, the way they're offset should limit the visibility of those bars. They should be less prominent. That should give us a good spread of light. Then I'm also going to head into my inventory and grab a bunch of food. I should have a few kelp crisps lying around. Yeah, there we go. Let's just put a whole bunch of those in the cockpit. So we'll look at our cockpit, press I, grab our kelp crisps and pop them in the cockpit. And we'll leave them there just as a safety backup. Now, automating our launch. We need 2 event controllers. I'm going to place one here. I'm going to place another one here.
And I'm going to put a 4th one in. That's mostly there for aesthetic symmetry, but may be useful for a warning system or something down the line. But we won't be using it today.
And now we need 1 timer block. So let's search timer. And we'll pop it in front. Let's hop in our cockpit, disconnect from the base just so that we've got easier control over everything. And we have our event controllers. What we want them to do is to do our launch. So what we're going to label them is Spaceship Event Controller Ascent. I'm going to label this one Spaceship Event Controller Space. So with those named, we're also then going to find our timer block. And we're going to call this Spaceship Liftoff. And starting from our timer block, we're going to run through our launch process using the event controllers to automate all the bits we can. So on launch, what we want this to do is find our up thrusters and set the override percentage to 100. We also wanted to turn off the down thrusters. The reason we have to do that here is we're going to be toggling that override on and off rather than increasing and decreasing its strength. So that means every time we toggle it off, those down thrusters will push. So we don't want that, so that's why we need to turn them off. And we also want to turn on the ascent event controller because we will have it turned off by default. So toggle lock on, and that's our timer block ready to go. Next up is our ascent controller. So we'll find that event controller, switch it off so that it's off to begin with. Our event will be grid speed changed. And once we have that, we'll have the option to select equal or greater than, and then we need to change our speed threshold. What I'm going to do is I'm going to control click on this slider and I'm going to type in 95 because 95 meters per second is pretty decent for this setup. Then select actions. So now we need to decide what this is going to do when our grid speed gets over 95 meters per second. So let's find our group. We'll find our up thrust, the full group, and we'll select set override percentage. So when we're at or above 95 meters per second, we want the override off. So that's 0. When we're less than 95, we want to set the override percentage to, well, we may as well pick full at 100%. And then, what do we want to have happen when this gets to space? So that's what our space event controller is for. And for this one, we need to select natural gravity changed. And we want our threshold to be equal or less than, not 1, but 0.04. And the reason for that specific value is that Space Engineer's gravity drops off from 0.05 to 0 immediately. So any value less than 0.05 will work here. And what do we want this to do when we reach space? Well, first off, what we want to do is turn off the ascent controller. So ascent, toggle block off. Move to our second hotbar with control 2. Next thing we want to do is control our thruster group. So we'll find our up thrust group and we'll set override percentage to 0. Then move to control bar 3 because there's still more we want to do. And on this one, we're going to set our down thrusters to on. And that's the last thing we need to set up. Now we just need a way to control the liftoff controller. So while we've got our hotbar ready to go, press G, find our timer block, put it on our hotbar with the control of trigger now. Our automation is set up and I've given this thing a bit of a paint job, a little bit of armor shaping around here. This version of the ship will be available on the workshop and the links will be in the description. But let's test this automation setup and see if it gets to space with just 1 push. Well, 2. I have to undock first. And then we hit 5. And off we go. You can see it's automatically keeping that speed somewhere under 100 meters a second. It's possibly a little bit overzealous with the 100% thrust override. If you wanted to, you could add extra event controllers that toggle at different planetary gravities. So when we're at high gravity, it'll override to 100%. When the gravity gets lower, it'll override less. Or alternatively, use an altitude thing so it switches off thrusters as we get closer to space. But honestly, this is still going to be quite efficient and going to be very, very hands-off and a really nice way to get to space. And there we go. We have made it to space. And coming to a stop, everything's set up and ready to control. Obviously, there might come a time when you need to interrupt that because you realize, oh no, I've forgotten some food. If that comes up, what you need to do is go to your control panel, find the event controller for ascent, and turn it off, and then go to your upthrust group and make sure the thrust override is set to 0. Make sure the down thrust is on, and then you'll have full control of your ship back. So you can return to base, grab your lunch, and head on back up again. If you've got any questions about how this ship was built or any of the other processes involved with building this today, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. If you've got any extra tips you'd love to share, I'd love to see those too. And I'll be back with more tutorials and plenty of other stuff soon, so I will see you then.